Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode I take a look at the 2005 movie Fantastic Four. It has a 27% on the tomato meter and a 45% on the audience score. It is rotten. I'm going to agree that it is rotten. It deserves to be rotten. And mentioning a previous rotten review that I did, the movie Skyline, it had an 18% on the tomato meter. This one should be closer to that. I don't know why this has a 45% on the audience score. Um, Skyline had an 18%, but this makes some of the same errors that Skyline made, and it makes worse errors with a bigger budget, with a director, actors, and producers that certainly should have known better. This is not a B movie. It was not intended to be a B movie, yet it still has a 45% on the audience score. I find that hard to believe. I think the more accurate score would be around 20%, nearly as bad as the movie Skyline. But anyway, not to divert this into another rotten review, I'm going to get into why I think this deserves to be 20% rotten, half of what it is here. First of all, this movie comes across as a superhero movie that was written for 13-year-olds by 13-year-olds. And if you take it on that, it works flawlessly. A 13-year-old would appreciate this from the mind of a 13-year-old. But however, this movie was written by adults. It was performed by adults, produced by adults. Everybody involved in this was over the age of 18, and yet it's completely juvenile. For example, Sue Storm, Reed Richards, they have no chemistry. They're supposed to, but they don't. They have the chemistry of two teenagers with a crush on each other, and a 13-year-old might believe they have chemistry and that they're in a relationship because, well, a 13-year-old has a more solid relationship with his or her 13-year-old girlfriend or boyfriend than these two have with each other. The average 13-year-old today probably has more relationship experience than this Reed Richard and Sue Storm shown here in this particular Fantastic Four. I can't really fault Michael Chiklis. He does a good job as the Thing. And here we see Johnny Storm, played by Chris Evans, who would later go on to be Captain America. So he's playing a Marvel superhero of another type here, and he does a good job of playing the character he's supposed to. But again, he's a character written to appeal to a 13-year-old, not necessarily an adult. Well, there are a lot of other problems. There are big-time plot holes. There are physics that are nonsensical and don't work. And probably there are physics that 13-year-olds, if a 13-year-old was in charge of the physics of the writing, they flunked out of just junior high school physics class because they ought to know better than some of this stuff too. This really is rotten in a lot of ways. Script-wise, you have one particular scene in the movie that illustrates a lot of the problems of this movie right in that one scene, and that is the scene on the bridge. It takes place on a vehicular bridge that's supposed to be in New York. Now, I don't think it was actually filmed in New York. I think it was filmed in Canada, and it's dressed up to look like it's New York. That's another problem that this film had. They had a very small location budget, so they couldn't really go to many places with this, and that shows in the final product. But yet, that bridge scene, let's say it is in New York, that's where it's supposed to be. On that bridge scene, the Thing causes a traffic jam by being hit by a vehicle, and you have characters that are able to somehow teleport there to the scene. Now remember, this is New York with heavy traffic in the city of New York. It's on a bridge. I don't know which bridge this is supposed to be. I'm not a native of New York, so I can't tell you which bridge this would match most closely. It is one of the bridges. Now, you have not only characters magically appearing at the scene in a small amount of time from across the city, but you also have rescue vehicles, police cars, ambulances, fire trucks, also just kind of teleporting ahead of the traffic jam and appearing at the scene because it's convenient for them to be there, along with the news crew that kind of teleports in there too, and they've got a tent set up all of a sudden. I don't know why they have a tent set up, but in any case, they have a tent set up on scene, and they actually have a little TV on a table in the tent because the TV needs to be there for something in the plot to work. And what did they plug the TV into that's on a table in a tent on this vehicular bridge in the middle of a traffic lane? Who knows? But the TV was tuned to a proper channel and got a just nice clear picture just so the plot could, so two characters in the plot could do what they needed to do in that scene. And it's completely ridiculous, and only a 13-year-old would think that that works in a story. This is not a story made for adults in any way. You also have nonsensical time passage. At times it's either nonsensical time passage or it's actual other errors in the script that make it seem like a strange amount of time is either passed or not passed. Again, you can't tell what's going on here because things happen in the movie. For example, the Fantastic Four come back to Earth. They're still trying to figure out their powers. They're trying to actually get rid of their powers. And it's barely into the story, and already everybody in the world, and certainly everybody in New York City, recognizes them as celebrities. Really? So it implies that a lot of time has gone by, like maybe weeks have gone by. Maybe a month has gone by since they returned from space. The movie made it feel like a day or two had gone by, so that might be just a pacing problem with the story. But at another point in the story, for example, one character acquires a license plate, a customized license plate on his car. That would be Johnny Storm's character. He's got a custom license plate on his sports car to denote that he's this character. Okay, that again applies. A lot of time went by. It's very strange. On one hand, it's shown that Michael Chiklis' character hasn't had time to, reconnect with his estranged wife, and ultimately she ends up leaving him. That's also part of the scene on the bridge. Okay, that implies that Michael Chiklis thing with his estranged wife, that implies a short amount of time has gone by, like just a few days at the most. Everything else is implying weeks, maybe a month have gone by. It doesn't add up. These elements that all suggest these different things are all in the same scenes together, and it's supposed to make some kind of logical sense, but it doesn't. It's a real issue. I don't know if it's a pacing problem or a script problem or both problems. It's as though whoever wrote this, they just lost track of what the hell they were doing. The plots, time-wise, it's all over the place. And again, the instant celebrity stuff where everybody just happens to know who they are. Everybody knows what their names are. They make up names for themselves. And in fact, it is Johnny Storm's character that makes up the names for everybody. That's different from the comics, because I know in the comic origin story, it was actually Reed Richards that made up the names for everybody, and there was a story why he did that. But no, it's Johnny Storm, and that's not a problem with this, taking liberty from, taking liberty in how the origin story went. That's not the problem in this. I'm not complaining that this didn't go along with the original comic story, because I wasn't a fan of the original comic. I'm complaining that they did it in a way that it doesn't make sense. Johnny Storm comes up with names for all these characters, and then 5 minutes later, everybody in New York and the world refers to them by these names. This doesn't make any sense at all. It's just completely all over the place time-wise. Yeah, and then when I saw the TV in the tent that had to be there at the scene of the car crash, forget about everything else that showed up miraculously at that car crash. A TV is there on a table, plugged into nothing but showing the... I don't even know how to describe it. It's just right in your face that a 13-year-old wrote this. So I'm not going to try to dwell on it, or I'll confuse myself as to how bad it is. Let's get into the rotten reviews. I've got a recent one here from October 25th of 2019. 4.5 stars. This film is just as it should be. Fun, as simple as that. If I could change one thing, it would be the Thing's costume makeup. But that being said, a solid, well-acted slice of entertainment. Well, let's pause right there and I'll give you my star review. I say this is 1 star. That's it. I wouldn't give it a 1.5 stars. I wouldn't give it 2. Yeah, I'm going to give this 1 star because there were just such glaring plot things in here right off the bat. Oh, And I forgot the biggest one that threw me out of my suspension of disbelief at the very beginning part of the story, before they got their powers. They go up to a space station that's financed and owned by Victor Von Doom's character. Okay, fine. They're on this space station. It's orbiting Earth. But guess what? The space station, it has Earth gravity. It's just like they're walking around a set on Earth, which they are in the real world. There was no attempt to show that there's, the zero G, the weightlessness effect, which there would be if they were orbiting the Earth, as a space station has to do. No, they're just walking around on a space station made up of presumably real-world technology in every way that you could see with your eye. And there's some anti-gravity, like Star Trek, like anti-gravity going on. That really pulled me out of this, because they're expecting me to take this astronaut space station stuff seriously, and in the plot, in the origin story of how they get their powers, and wow, like they're just walking around a space station and there's no attempt to explain how they're walking around with full Earth gravity. It makes no sense. That threw me out before any of the other stuff. But again, if I was 13 and I was expecting a Star Wars or Star Trek film, I was in that mindset as a 13-year-old, and this had been written by a 13-year-old to appeal to me, then this would have been fine, right? It would have gone right over my head. So that's why I came out right off the bat and said this appears to be a film written by a 13-year-old for a 13-year-old. And there's other stuff in the film, but that struck me even before the bridge scene. And that's why I say 1 star. Period, flat out, 1 star. And I'll mention some other things as we continue, but let's move down to September of 2019, 2 stars. What a disappointment this movie was. It was pretty alright, but I had many flaws. This gets a D+. Yeah, that's not good English, but I agree, D+, yeah. 1 star. 2 stars, fantastic bore, minus the fantastic part. Boring, I wouldn't say it's boring. It's like, it's certainly like popcorn fun for the teenagers. I wouldn't call it boring. It's got so many other flaws. Boring? Nah, not really. 3 stars, not as bad as people make it out, but not perfect either. Ben and Johnny are really great. The script just needed some rewriting in some places, but I'd say it's a passable movie. I disagree. Another reason why this can't come close to 3 stars, let me give you another little plot hole. At one point, the Thing wants to turn back into his human self for a lot of reasons. That's completely believable. So Reed Richards develops a type of like a pod, a chamber in which you can get inside, and it will reverse the effect that that cloud in space had, and it will take away your power and return you back to normal. Well, okay, fine, but now it doesn't work because it doesn't have enough power. When Reed Richards tries to use this chamber to turn, one of them back, it fails because it sucks up more power than they can provide it. It takes all the power out of the power grid. There's just simply not enough power to make it work. Aha. So later in the plot, Ben Grimes, the Thing, he enlists the help of Victor Von Doom, who has the ability to supply power from his magical self, apparently, and he'll give it the power boost it needs to function and turn the Thing back into his normal human self. And this is what happens. The Thing becomes his normal human self. Now, later in the film, when the Thing he decides he wants his powers back to join his friends to fight Victor Von Doom, he needs to go back into the chamber, and he needs to reverse the process, and it's hand waved away how he would know how to set up the chamber to reverse the process. That's fine, okay. But he goes into the chamber and comes out as the Thing, right? Only problem is, where did he get the power from? Yeah, big plot hole right there too. And it's plot holes like that would pass as a 13-year-old writer would do these things, and they would pass for, in a 13-year-old audience. But there's no way I can give this 3 stars. There's no way in hell when you've got plot holes like that all throughout this movie. It's a comic book movie. Sure, you can hand wave some things away, but you've got plot holes that you can't hand wave away with planets. They're so big. So no, I say this is a 1 star movie, and I'm not going above 1 stars. So let's continue with another 3-star review, September 2019, 6 out of 10, better than the Silver Surfer movie. Well, yeah, it might be, but that doesn't make this 3 stars. So again, 1 star. And a 1-star review from August 2019. Fantastic Four is a toyetic approach to the superhero genre. It's a blight upon Marvel's legacy. The cinematography looks like it was done by a group of 2-year-olds on a field trip. Yeah, there are some shots where, you have these great characters. Like, think about all the things you can set up to show Reed Richards' character as the Stretch, or Mr. Stretch, or whatever the hell he's called. Think of all the weird camera angles and things you can do with that. But no, does the film take advantage of that? No. It just shows the most boring ways and cheesy and kind of disgusting ways in which Reed Richards can stretch out his arm to grab a roll of toilet paper from across the room, and etc. Yeah, it's just juvenile. 1 star, okay. 2 stars, marred by goofy attempts at wit, subpar acting, and bland storytelling. Fantastic Four is a mediocre attempt to bring Marvel's oldest hero team to the big screen. I'll have to kind of agree with all that. It's goofy. The 2 main leads, the romantic leads, like I said, Reed Richards and Sue Storm, they have no chemistry. They're not believable as a couple, only in the most teenage way. And then on top of that, I think Jessica Alba was actually miscast. They use her for her sex appeal in this several times. As the invisible woman, so to speak, she has to, of course, take off her clothes. We have to see her taking off her bra in public, etc. There's no full nudity, but in a 13-year-old fantasy type way, they have to show her sexy, they have to show her nude, and they have to show her in a tight suit and make sure we see her body, her hips swinging back and forth. Again, this is like a 13-year-old that came up with this for 13-year-olds. But again, aside of what she was used for and to be a sexy female, something to look at on the team, she wasn't used for anything. She's not taken seriously. She doesn't do anything plot-wise that she needs to be there. And in fact, I know that's not what her role was in the comic. So, yeah, Jessica Alba was just cast as eye candy. Otherwise, she was miscast. Take your pick. Again, we say it's a mediocre attempt to bring Marvel's oldest hero team to the big screen. Yeah, it's mediocre because from what I understand, the Fantastic Four comic, these characters are supposed to be the more mature, they're supposed to be the more reasoned, the more scientific, the more not teenage, goofy type characters of the Marvel Universe. They're supposed to be the serious ones, and they're actually the goofy 13-year-old ones in this, and that's completely the opposite of what comic book fans would have expected from everything I've read. 3.5 stars. I remember seeing this movie in the theaters and loving it. There are certainly some problems, but for me, easily overlooked because the chemistry of the 4 main stars. I love the relationships between each of them, any combination. They do feel like a family. One relationship I worried about going in was the Ben-Johnny interplay. Not done right, it could get irritating, but I felt they handled it brilliantly. Still makes me laugh every time I watch it. Okay, I'll agree that The Thing and Johnny Blaze, those 2 worked well together, but Reed Richards and Sue Storm, it was a complete fail. Perhaps both of them were miscast, really, because they felt like they were 13-year-olds pretending to have a crush on each other. That's what it felt like. 2 stars, not many memorable or rememberable moments in this movie. Yeah, there wasn't really anything memorable about it. 4 stars, while not great by any means, this is still a fun ride. Only if you're 13 or under. And I think that's true. If you had been under the age of 13, this is probably a fine movie in the theater. You probably enjoyed it. Again, people wanted a serious comic book movie, and I guess this was marketed in a serious way too. It wasn't marketed as something just for the kids, but that's pretty much what came out of this. 3 stars. This movie was dumb, but it's still better than Fan4tastic, or the newest Fantastic Four movie of 2015, I believe. Now, I've heard everybody bag on that, say it's the worst. It's certainly got a much more rotten score than this, so I may be looking into that one too. But first figured I'd go ahead and rip this one apart so that we can really find out how low it can go from here. Half a star. I was late to the party on this one. I saw it a year after it came out. So I'd heard from audiences, from critics, and from the director himself how bad this movie was. So when I first started watching it, I actually thought, this is pretty good. And then you get to the midpoint of the film when they get their powers and this whole thing just crumbles. The movie basically skips over the second act of the movie. It's about 10 minutes long of jumbled storytelling and time jumps, and we go straight to the third act. I don't think it failed. I don't think it got to the midpoint before it failed. Like I said, when we went up to that space station and they're walking around like they're on Earth, right off the bat I'm wondering, what? That kind of didn't work for me right there, and that was pretty far into the movie. Also, another scene, now it pops into my mind. When Jessica Alba's character is first introduced to the audience, she's introduced as I believe it's like the public relations, or it's something that's not scientific. It's something to do with genetic research and public relations, or maybe it's she's the head of genetic research for Victor Von Doom's company. And then later, a few minutes later, Victor Von Doom says that he has assigned her, Sue Storm, to be in charge of the launch, of the scheduled launch of the mission to the space station. What? Why would Victor Von Doom, the head of this billion-dollar company, he's supposed to be a genius, right? He's got like an underling that's in charge of genetic research, and that's what her specialty is. And yet he puts her in charge of the actual rocket mission launch. That also kind of took me out of it, like, what? And they kind of hand waved that away and moved through that line so quickly in an elevator that it didn't kill it for me. It was later when we got to the space station and, we had full gravity that I just that really killed it for me. But let's move on. 3 stars. A decent iteration of the famous comic book team. No. 2.5 stars. This adaptation truly feels mediocre, but thinking of how simple it was on its time, Fantastic Four brings a load of story elements to its source, but couldn't improvise it somehow. It's lower than that. 3.5 stars. This is probably the most underrated Marvel movie. Well, it's not a masterpiece, but it's very watchable and charming. Is it the most underrated Marvel movie? I don't know about that. It's hard to say. I'd have to go back and watch them all, and it depends on if we're actually, when we say Marvel movie, we're kind of saying it's an MCU movie. There are 2 different things there. MCU movies are like a subset of Marvel movies, so they're kind of different things. So that's kind of a tough one there. But I'll just take this as somebody that, was 13 or under at the time they saw this. So 3.5 stars. This movie was a little slow-paced, I feel, but something about it made me enjoy it still. Maybe this movie isn't for everyone, but if you're a true Marvel fan, it's perhaps worth watching. I would say no. If you're a Marvel comic book fan, this is going to be really insulting to you. If you're a Marvel movie fan, you're probably used to the MCU movies by now. So it's going to be a fail. 3.5 stars. A group of astronauts gain superpowers after a cosmic radiation exposure and must use them to oppose the plans of their enemy, Dr. Victor Von Doom. It exists largely to entertain and delight, which used to be precisely what summer blockbusters were engineered to do. So that's a vote that this is an enjoyable teenage summer movie, okay? 5 stars, greatest adaptation of Marvel's First Family. No. You know what's funny? People tell me that even though the Roger Corman Fantastic Four was never released, so you can't count it as a released movie. Many people do, and although its budget is like Roger Corman bad budget, like he's known for, that actually at least the characters in the story are better, believe it or not. So maybe that's worth checking into. This is definitely not the greatest adaptation of Marvel's First Family. Maybe it's the least of the rotten ones on Rotten Tomatoes. Maybe this one is like, it has a higher rotten score than the 2015 film, certainly. But, enough people have told me that the Roger Corman one is better story-wise and character-wise. So, no, I disagree. And that's pretty sad because that unfinished movie would just be rotten because it's unfinished. Half a star. This is the worst movie ever. No, 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 no. Not close to that. 3.5 stars. Don't listen to the haters. This is a good movie with a great cast and villain. The second one, maybe not so much, but this one is fantastic. Okay, okay, if you're 12. 2.5 stars. Good special effects and cast, but the plot is very simplistic and it doesn't have the witty humor of the Deadpool, Guardians of the Galaxy, Iron Man, and later Avengers movies that has become Marvel trademark lately. Again, I just finished saying that's MCU, not Marvel. So people are confusing the two together, like they're saying that the MCU movies are Marvel movies. Actually, no. You know, tigers are animals, but not all animals are tigers, right? So when you say Marvel movies and then you say MCU movies, you're mixing those up. Deadpool was a Marvel movie. Guardians of the Galaxy is an MCU movie. Iron Man's an MCU movie. So was Avengers. So yes, compared to Deadpool, perhaps don't compare it to Guardians of the Galaxy. It's not the same franchise. 2 stars. Terrible movie. I cannot believe I used to like this film when I was a kid. Fantastic Four deserves to have at least a 30% Rotten Tomato audience score. The casting sucks. The cast is bad. Everyone is miscast in their roles. The 4 titular characters don't really wear their uniforms while confronting and fighting Doctor Doom until the third act. The Fantastic Four only do 2 heroic things in the movie: save civilians on the bridge and defeat Doctor Doom. That's all. Why does this terrible movie have a higher audience? Yeah, it should be even lower. I agree. Again, they're bringing up a good point. Victor Von Doom is like brought right out at the beginning of this movie. He's shown to us that he's going to be the villain. It's shown and foreshadowed in a lot of ways. There's a lot of hinting there. Even a 13-year-old gets it that Victor Von Doom's not the good guy when we're first introduced to him. And yet it does take like more than 2/3 of this movie to get around to him being the big bad that they're fighting. Yeah, the movie just wastes a lot of time. That's probably why people say it's boring, because when do we actually get to see the Fantastic Four fight Victor Von Doom? It's not till almost the end of the film. You know, what's going on here? Victor Von Doom doesn't hardly do anything. He's just like a corporate villain with electrical powers in his body now and a mask. It's pretty pathetic, and yeah, it's boring for an audience that expects, superheroes to go out and fight the big bad villain. This would be very boring. It was very boring. 1.5 stars. The good thing about the film is that it is very faithful to the comic. The bad thing is that they make it look like a tonto and a childish show. I don't know what they're saying, but they're wrong. It's not faithful to the comic. The characters don't act like they do in the comic, so that's a big fail. 2.5 stars. Is it entertaining? Sure. Is it fantastic? Just about, considering it's from 2005. Is it the best Marvel has to offer? Hardly. Nobody would make that case, please. The lowest rated films of the MCU are superior to this. Thor: The Dark World is superior to this. The Hulk with Edward Norton is superior to this. And I don't really care for either one of those, but they're better than this film. 0.5 star. It takes a concentrated group effort to create a bullshit movie. This movie was so bad it doesn't deserve a review. F this movie, F the actors, writers, and director, and F the producer. Now that sounds like an actual Fantastic Four comic book fan, an authentic one. 3.5 stars. I watched this movie over and over again, and it's just a good movie. If you watch this over and over again, you know what? I just don't believe you. I just flat out do not believe you. 5 stars. It was a very good movie. I don't believe you either. 5 stars. Seen lots. 2012-ish. I have no idea what you're talking about. 1.5 star. Bland storytelling, unfunny, uneventful, and below average acting. Yes, I agree with all that, except I give this like 1 star. Let's see, 3.5 stars. Not a good start to the series. Hoping the sequel is better. Well, this is a review from April of 2018, so I have to break the bad news to them. If they haven't figured this out already, it gets worse from here. 3 stars. Fantastic Four has good legs and is well-rounded, but not as good as it should have been. It's almost like they're describing some kind of girl that they just met or something. I don't know what to make of that. 2 stars. Fantastic Four out of 10. Maybe. I think it's lower than 4 out of 10. 2 stars. Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis give outstanding performances and define the characters in which they play. Also, I give credit to Julian McMahon for giving a strong villain performance, even if it didn't feel like it was Doctor Doom. Despite this, the lack of a plot and the woeful miscasting of pretty much everyone else in the film makes this a forgettable B-lost film, which makes it unfortunate that it's the best Fantastic Four movie yet. Well, I'll mention one thing. You know, Victor Von Doom in this, you'll later see this actor playing another villain in the guise of a superhero in the Amazon series The Boys. And he's fantastic in that. And he has just the right amount of villain behind a hero's face and costume. That's much better than this. Just The Boys just blows this away. Just an aside there. 5 stars. What an awesome movie. 3.5 stars, not great, but it had its moments. I thought the cast was pretty good for the Fantastic Four, but I don't think Doctor Doom was handled correctly. Chris Evans was great as Johnny Storm. It was funny and amusing, but not a great story at all. That's a lot of words to just say it's crap. I don't know why you gave it 3.5 stars. 3 stars. The plot might be predictable and some of the actors far from charismatic, but Fantastic Four is a very pleasant, feel-good movie. There's many laugh-out-loud jokes, the pacing is just right, the effects are really good, Chris Evans great, the bridge scene perfect, and most of the attempts at serious stuff. I have to stop there. Excuse me, are you being sarcastic? No. The actors are not charismatic at all. Very pleasant, feel-good movie for 13-year-olds, sure. Laugh-out-loud jokes, I don't recall not one laugh-out-loud joke in this. Not one. I think most of the attempts at humor I missed totally. They went totally by me, completely by me, so I can't even critique the missed opportunities there. There just flat out wasn't anything that I laughed at here. There might have been an attempt, but again, it was such a lame attempt if I didn't even see there was an attempt. So I completely disagree. The pacing is just right. No, it feels too long. It feels too boring towards the middle, so no. Chris Evans is great. Yeah, sure. He plays a douchebag. Okay. The bridge scene is perfect. Now that's where I had to stop here. The bridge scene in every way has the bridge scene is a perfect example, a showcase of everything wrong with this film. The bridge scene has every element that's wrong with this film and an example or more than one example of every bad element put together in that one scene. It is the one scene that ruins this damn thing, completely buries it. I don't know how you could see otherwise. Now, I'm going to continue with this now and see what else this guy's telling me. I always relish the restricted but existent socially conscious subtext such films have. In the end, though, this is a winner because it is highly enjoyable. I'm not even sure if English is their first language. They're putting a lot of fancy words together that are... It's a convoluted mess of words here. So I'm just going to have to disagree. Once he told me that the bridge scene was a standout scene, it was only a standout scene. It was a showcase of everything bad with this movie. How did a TV get on the bridge plugged into nothing that happened to be turned to the proper channel just to show the characters at the perfect time something so that they could make their dialogue work on that bridge? Please. 2.5 stars. I loved this movie when I was 15. Now as an adult, I think it's okay. Its problems, ham-fisted plot points. Every movie has a map of plot points. What makes it not feel like a checklist is when there is a good story around it. That way we flow almost seemingly to every point and enjoy the story and its developments. This just feels like a checklist. Have the four be like a family. Let's give them previous history that kind of sort of ties them together. Let's do the same with Doom in regards to them knowing him. Yeah, that's why I give this 1 star, because it's like they went through the checklist, but they didn't even do it right. You know, this reviewer does mention that Victor Von Doom in this one, his origin story is that he knows these characters already and that he's this rich philanthropist. corporate billionaire type. And he already knows all these characters, and he's even dating Sue Storm. That's completely different than the comic book. Again, I'm not a comic book fan, so I don't. That doesn't, that's not the problem I have with this. But Victor Von Doom, he was just like pointless in this movie. Yeah, he looked cool, but he didn't do anything, and it took most of the movie to get to anything with him, with any struggle with him. Um, it was just like pointless. He was completely wasted as a villain. He was pointless. So I'm going to go back to, this page here, and where we can look again on this 45% audience score, and we can wonder why it has 759,102 user ratings. That somehow put this at 45% when I say this should be closer to 20, 25%, maybe lower. Again, I think this is right there with Skyline for rottenness, and I don't know why it's given a pass. Maybe there's a lot of 12-year-olds on here. Maybe back in time there's just thousands of 12-year-old boys clicking away on here. I don't know. In any case, this thing's totally rotten. I do not recommend it. And I am going to see you all again on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.